Yeah, yeah.
Throw your hands up, everyone. Shake the stress that's killing you. Fancy footwork just like me. Shake it over this dance floor. Throw your hands up, everyone. Shake the stress that's killing you. Fancy footwork just like me. Shake it over this dance floor.
Enjoy your life, be free, live right. Enjoy your life, have some fun, enjoy.
Coming up next on Mental Health Matters with Marty, stay tuned as we talk about Black men and their mental wellness. Stay tuned. Hey y'all, what's up everybody? Yes, it's your host, it's me, Martina Sellers, coming to you live and in living color, where the sun is always shining in Southern California. But y'all, I have to admit, we got a little bit of rain today. As I say, it never rains in Southern California. Well, it rained today. But we are so glad to see you. Hope you are doing well. And come on in the room. Come on in the room. Invite some people to have this conversation with us as we're continuing this conversation on our mental health and wellness. And y'all, if you have missed out, and I hope you haven't missed out on what we did almost 2 weeks ago with the Black Men Made Well. We had an amazing time with that whole virtual series. If you have not checked it out, please go back and check out. We started at February 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th. We walked through that whole week and dealt with stigmas. And that's where we're going to revisit some of that stigmas, but talk about the wellness and what Black mental health wellness looks like as opposed to an illness itself. And it's so important, especially in this day and age, that we celebrate and that we work towards our mental wellness, because it is so vital and so important to everything that we do. But let's just, as a reminder, I'm a little tongue-tied. I don't know why I'm tongue-tied tonight, y'all. As a reminder, we want to remind you about the purpose of the Mental Health Matters with Marty's show. And the purpose of this is this. We are indicated to be an educational tool, and an educational tool only. We are not, let me repeat, not a replacement for you seeing your therapist, because that's what I am, or your psychiatrist, or your pastor, or what have you. We are not a substitute for those necessary professional people to help you along the way. However, we are part of your extended educational journey. We're part of your extended treatment plan. We're part of your extension of your health and wellness. Now, if you are experiencing any type of psychiatric emergency or any type of medical emergency in and of itself, please go to your nearest urgent care and get some help. But if not, we want you to continue to join in on our show, because we got a great show for you tonight. And let me remind you, how do I participate in this discussion? Because this is all about you, and we want you to participate in this. Starting effective immediately, we have been going exclusively to YouTube. Did you hear me? Exclusively to YouTube. So invite those who are still on Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, you name it. We are on YouTube, and YouTube only. Woo! Why? Because YouTube lets us do so many other things that is definitely going in the right direction in what we want to do. As we're growing the Mental Health Marty YouTube channel, we want to make sure that we're doing all the right things as well. So, again, how do you do it? You like, you subscribe, you click the button so that you can be reminded of those things. Daryl, give us that demonstration. That's it. Yes. If you did all those things, then every time we have a show, you're going to get acknowledged and you're going to get a reminder about the show. So come on in the room. We are so glad that you are joining us and everything. So listen, let's start off today as we're talking about the flight, the fight, the freeze, or the fawn. Black men and trauma responses. Yes, we have been experiencing so much trauma these days, but this has not just been something that has been recent. As we look at the traumatic experience of Black people as a whole, since landing in this country in 1619, 1615, all of those things, we have had a traumatic experience. And that trauma can be, and in most cases, can be cultural, it can be generational. And how do we break the stronghold and the bond of trauma, especially for Black men? I'm of the belief that oftentimes when we have trauma or traumatic experiences that occur in our lives, I believe we do one of four things. We have the flight, we have the fight, we have the freeze, and we have the fawn. We're going to discuss some of those four in much more detail later on in the show. But definitely, if you agree with that, please let us know and let us know that you're listening and what that looks like even for yourself. And I'm hoping that this will resonate with you. And as we're talking about mental wellness versus mental illness. Now, what are you talking about? I'm so glad you asked me that question. When we're talking about mental wellness, we are talking about the day-to-day functions. Yes, sometimes we're not going to be well as other days we're going to be more well than others. For instance, when we have a cold, we may have a slight, we're not feeling well. Well, our emotions and our mind, we can also not quite feel well on those times as well. And it is not necessarily an illness. Wellness speaks to the temporary portion of that. Illness speaks to the long term on that. So that's what we definitely want to differentiate tonight when we're talking about your mental wellness, your day-to-day functioning, to make sure that you can carry out your activities for daily living. However, when your activities for daily living are impaired, then we have to talk about this is no longer just about your mental wellness, but we now talk about mental illness and what are the things that we have to do in order to make sure that we are functioning on a daily basis in our everyday life. I am so glad to have my boy here with me tonight. He is a brother from another mother. I can call on him at the last minute. He comes through. He's a trauma expert himself. I call on him because I've learned so much from this brother. He's doing such great work in the DMV area, Washington, D.C. So I thank him for staying up late because it might be 7 p.m. on the West Coast, but it's 10 p.m. on the East Coast. So I'm glad that this brother said, listen, Marty, I'll do it. And so grateful for this brother. So let's welcome, he's not a stranger to the Mental Health Matters with Marty show, none other than my friend, my boy, my colleague, none other than Cory George. Cory, how you feeling, man?
Thank you for having me.
Listen,
Listen,
always.
I'm good. Yeah, and so thank you for having me. I'm always happy to talk about this topic. You know, this is what I do. This is what I live for
It
now.
is what you
So
do.
I'm just I'm just glad to be here.
Yes. Cory, you're looking good over there in DC. DC must be treating you well. Listen, I'm gonna come out there and work out with you and do some work because you glowing. You're looking great, man. What are you doing?
You know, first it's a selfie light. That's the first thing. Secondly, I'm
We'll take whatever
hydrating
it
more, but
is.
but
Okay.
I'm being conscious about my
Mm-hmm.
everyday. You know, and I
That's
told you
good.
some of the things that have been happening.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I really made conscious effort to be very intentional about how I treat myself. You know, the things I eat, you know, the things
Yeah.
I tell myself, and the people I surround myself with.
Yes.
So it really has been helping because
Yes.
every day is so intentional now.
But it's showing. It's showing. And I think that that
Thank
speaks
you.
to our topic tonight, talking about mental wellness. And I love what you
Hmm.
said. You said, I am taking care of myself. And I think
Yeah,
that's an area that we as Black men have been denied, if not told, we're supposed to take care of everyone else first and ourselves last. And I think that's a wrong perspective. Now, that's not to say, because we've even made it seem like if we take care of ourselves, then we're being narcissistic, we're being selfish, we
yeah,
don't care about anyone else. And Cory, the more I get into this and learning to take care of myself, the more I realize that that was a lie that was fed down to us. Because you said you've been taking care of yourself physically, you've been taking care of yourself
yeah.
not just mentally, but also what you put into your body. You said staying hydrated. I'm sure making sure you're getting proper sleep, eating the right foods.
Absolutely.
What has that done, and what has been the outcome of you taking time to take care of yourself?
Well, I've always believed, at least for the last several years, is that the way I treat myself dictates how I teach you to treat me. So
Right,
if you see
right.
me loving on myself, if you see me respecting my
Yes,
body, if you see me respecting
yes,
my mental wellness, you're probably gonna look at
yes.
it. I have to come with it because I see him taking care of himself. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the first thing. I even tell my
Mm-hmm.
kids, I said, I come first because when I'm happy and when I'm good, that's what you get from me. I don't want to give you a
Yes.
half-baked dad. I want to give you a fully
Right.
attentive dad, and also to teach you
Yes.
that when you have your family one day, if you do, that you can still have your own identity while still serving
Yes.
those that you need to serve.
Yes.
But I want to hit on a
Yes.
topic that you had mentioned about black men thinking, oh well, black people, even
Yes.
black women, tending to put themselves last. What do you think slavery
Yes.
was? So let's
Well,
go
of
back to
course.
slavery. So let's take it back.
Yes.
Let's go way back.
Let's go back.
We were forced to take care of
Hmm.
other families. We were forced to
Yes.
take care of
Yes.
other people's property, other people's crops. And
Yes.
then when we got
Yes.
home, that was the time we had. And so whatever food we had left over, that's what we got. And whatever rags we
Yes.
had left over, that's what we got. So that's why
Yes.
even still today, we're taught to be grateful just for the minuscule levels of survival. That's not
Hmm.
brand new. It just looks better because we
It's
have
not.
money to look like we're surviving
Wow.
just a
That's
different
good.
way.
That's good. I
So
love what
yeah,
you said there,
so
because
so this isn't new.
no, it's not. No, I was saying I love what you're saying when it talked about when we talk in the slavery, the tragic thing about this is that this generation is believing that slavery was a choice and that they could have stopped it at any time. And you're like, wow.
No.
I'm just blown away. That's a whole nother topic and discussion and everything.
Yeah.
But you're right, whatever leftover energy you had, whatever leftover
Mhm.
food scraps you had, whatever leftover material goods you had, whatever leftover housing or what, everything was left over. So we did not have an opportunity to take care of ourselves. You're absolutely right. We were forced to take care of others, and we were always
Mhm.
last. And how do we stop? As
Always
I say
last.
this, yeah, the stinking thinking of putting
Yeah.
ourselves last, but raising it to the level. Because I totally agree with you, Cory. Our children, our relationships, our job, all of that needs 100% the best of us. But when we have to put
Yes.
everything else first, I can't give you the best because I don't even know what my best is because I have not taken time to know myself.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and it's interesting because I was looking at these proposals online, these wedding proposals, and
right,
I
right,
said,
right,
how many women have been duped into thinking um,
right.
at a young age that I'm no longer the person I was raised to be.
Right.
That started off
Yeah.
when you see young girls with the baby dolls and the wedding dresses and and babies playing with baby dolls as if they're mothers.
Mhm.
So we've
Mhm.
been groomed from childhood to think these things, and then
Yes.
when we become adults, it's not foreign to us. Yet we wonder why
Right.
we're in these positions of lack and why we
Right.
tend to then ignore our own needs. because it's a
Yes.
grooming process that has never stopped.
Yes, totally, totally. So mental health has definitely been blessings to you as well. Definitely. Mental health has definitely been the last thing. And if I can say this, Corey,
Mhm.
mental health for black folk really has been pushed to the forefront because of the pandemic and because of everything that we've seen. But my question is, how long is this going to last for? My prayer is that it would last. And that's why we and I know that's your heart too, why we champion so
Yeah,
much about mental health and wellness, and why you champion so much around trauma, especially for the black man
absolutely.
and our black people, because I'm going to say it like Dr. Rita Walker. Corey, you got to get this book if you don't have this book already. The
I think I have it
Unapologetic
on my iPad
Guide to,
actually.
yeah. Oh my, okay. She kills me in a great way when she says it this way, that I love it, says, when you are in such pain, you probably do not want to ask for help because, like many black people, your pain no longer registers as crises. Woo! That statement there just blows my mind away. How many of we, and I'm speaking to black men today, we are
Yes.
so used to the pain. We're so used to the trauma. We're so used to putting our mental health, because we don't see the value in that, on the back burner till we no longer know when we are in crisis. Talk to me about that, Corey.
Well, let's be clear, as black people, but black men, we are
Hmm.
almost, well, most of us have been raised in trauma and didn't know it. So for
Yes,
us, trauma has to
yes.
look like an explosion. Trauma has to look
Right,
trauma has to look visible to us for us to register. I was
right.
raised in the hood. I didn't realize that I was undergoing some type of trauma as I saw, gang fights and all
Right.
these other things happening. I
Right.
didn't know that, watching a man beat his wife outside was traumatic for me. I didn't know that.
Yes.
I thought trauma had to
Yes.
be, something like the World Trade Center. Oh, that's trauma.
Right.
But then again,
Right.
but then I found myself thinking about actually repeating the trauma or only feeling comfortable in traumatic settings. And that's how
Yes.
deep it goes.
Yes.
So when you only feel
Yes.
comfortable in highly stressful types of situations, you may have a trauma background that has defined your life,
Yes.
you know?
Can we
And so in
define?
these settings, yeah,
Mhm. No, I'm saying, can
no, go
we
ahead.
define what I would say? A lot of times we talk about trauma, but I'm of the belief
Yeah,
that a lot of us still don't understand the definition of trauma. And you being a trauma expert, help our
yeah.
listeners to understand, what is the definition of trauma? What is trauma?
So the basic understanding of trauma is it is a psychological reaction to a highly
Mhm.
distressful life event. And highly
Yes.
distressful is also a subjective thing. So, and I say
Yes.
this and I always use this example. If you are a refugee from a war-torn country and you hear gunshots and missiles all the time, and you move to,
Yes.
let's say, Houston, Texas, and you hear a
Right.
gunshot once a day, well, to you, that's
Yes.
calm. But to me, I'm traumatized because I'm not used to that.
Yes.
So that's why it is
Yes.
it is so subjective that each person's experience has to be respected. So that means, for example, if you and I
Yes.
are in a car accident and we are in the same accident, we have the same injuries, if at all, I may
Mhm.
walk away with a lifetime of mental scars where I may never want to drive again.
Yes.
And you get on,
Yes.
and the next day, but you're back in a car because
Yes.
whatever things that may have happened in my life right before that,
Mhm.
any environmental influences,
Yes.
anything that has ever
Yes.
happened, it dictates how I respond to that single event.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that's why when
Mhm.
someone says I've been traumatized, and someone says, "Well, I don't
Right.
understand," well, all that means is it didn't affect you the same way, but we should respect someone else's experience on that level.
I totally agree. And I also like this definition because I love that it is trauma is a deep emotional wound. Period. It's
Yes.
a very simplified definition of it, but I think we understand
Yeah.
both of our definitions, because too often we talk about trauma, and especially
Yeah.
when I get clients in the office, and we're talking about these different things. And like one client said, didn't realize he was in trauma because he saw his father have two heart attacks right in front of him, and the second one
Hmm.
is where his father died in his arms. And he says, well, I just don't understand. I'm like, that's post-traumatic stress, the key being trauma,
Yeah,
post-traumatic stress. And a lot of times we don't realize, because we've become so, no, it's become our norm. It's become,
yeah.
and so when we're putting temporary band-aids or undealt trauma, can we let's go there. So got definition. What are the results of undealt trauma from your studies and your experiences?
Well, because I deal with a lot of PTSD, and we also have
Mm-hmm.
what's called ASD, and that's when your traumatic stress and the symptoms last up to 30 days. Anything after that, then we
Yes.
can start diagnosing, uh, the PTSD part. But when we're
Yes.
looking at it,
Yes.
it has so many effects. So we're going to talk about the basic things, right? So we're going to talk about lack of sleep because you're having flashbacks and
Yes.
nightmares in the
Yes.
middle of the night. We're
Yes.
and we talking about hypervigilant, meaning if
Yes.
you're scared of the dark, you're never going to turn off the lights. Or if you were
Yes.
sexually assaulted, you're going to watch your back all the time because you don't want to
Yes.
feel the experience. Or you may avoid a situation that may remind you of that experience.
Yes.
You
Yes.
may become easily agitated, anger issues,
Yes.
depression,
Yes.
anxiety, substance
Yes.
abuse actually happens,
Yes.
and other types of abuses. I mean, it could be gambling, it could be porn, it could be anything that gives you the
Yes.
temporary uh, feeling of relief of their stress. It can be
Yes.
sadness. It can be unexplained body pains. Um, it,
Yes.
like if you have lower back pains, if you have gastrointestinal issues, that's because the
Yes.
hormones that are activated by stress are on top of your kidneys. You know,
Yes. And a lot of
it
times
can
we
lead
don't
to
realize that.
yeah.
We really don't, because I always say it this way, Corey: trauma and stress enters the body one way. And if it's not
Hmm.
dealt with, it does exit the body in a lot of physical
And this
ailments,
is why the
a lot of
doctor always tells you
physical.
when you're injured
Yeah.
or no, and this is why the doctor always tells you when you're sick, you know, try not to stress out. And I didn't understand
Yes.
it until I started doing my studies. But it's like, oh, he's telling me
Right, right.
not to exacerbate my illness with stress.
Mhm. Mhm.
We could talk about how heightened and the stress that is so prolonged, it opens you up to things such as diabetes, hypertension,
Right.
heart attacks. And it also, if it's
Strokes.
not also worked on, you can have these other things such as suicidal thoughts as well
Yes.
as homicidal
Uh-huh.
thoughts.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it's I mean, and it runs the gamut. And again, it depends on the person.
Yes. Totally agree with you on that, because, well, especially, I had a client call me last week, says, I think I had a heart attack. He goes, and I went to the urgent care, and all of my signs read normal. And I couldn't understand it. He said it was so real. I said, that is what we call a panic attack or an anxiety attack.
Mhm.
Yes, the Black community is severely traumatized, and it includes, thank you, in anxiety. And that's why my brother smokes a lot of weed. You're absolutely right. That is definitely signs of it, because
Well,
what it does is, talking about how to lower our anxiety in those things. And I always find that we have to find some natural means of releasing that as well. But
yeah.
you were going to comment, Corey. Go right ahead.
Yes, I was because there's a large number of my clients, especially when we deal with
Hmm.
PTSD and childhood
Yes.
traumas and everything else. A lot of them have come
Yes.
to me smoking weed every day, drinking every day. And
Yes.
I said, okay, and I normalize it for them. I say, because you are feeling that way, I understand why that was your first recourse because you didn't
Hmm.
have any other
Hmm.
options. But now
Right.
let's work
Right.
on offering you options as we lower your
Good.
dependence on that. Because smoking weed
Yes.
on a casual basis, I don't judge that, right? But if it's used as
Right.
avoidance, and I always
There
remind
we
them,
go.
anything you avoid is turns into layers. So you avoid one thing
Yes.
that day, then the next day it doesn't go away. That's just day number two on it, then day number three. So
Yes.
by the time you are not smoking, you're so overwhelmed that all you can
Hmm.
do is find relief. And so then we have
Yes.
to work on the ways of, And sometimes we have to do what's called some type of exposure therapy to bring
There
them
we
into the
go. I
space of,
love exposure
okay, we have
therapy.
to deal with these things that are triggers in a mild way until we can walk into those spaces, or we don't avoid those situations, or we can walk in the grocery store without feeling triggered, or we can get back in our cars. So it's a gradual way of saying all these triggers, let's address those until they're a point where you can manage them. And that way you
Yes,
don't
yes,
have such a fear factor within your spirit, and it's the fear that causes the anxiety. It's the fear of
yes,
something happening again
yes,
that causes that
yes.
anxiety.
And that's why exposure therapy is so
Mhm.
relevant a lot of times in post
Yes,
traumatic stress situations. Can you
absolutely.
explain some more about because what exposure therapy is? You and I, we use these terms a lot of times because we're in the field,
Yeah.
so we understand that. But for to some of our listeners who may not understand exactly what exposure therapy is, can you kind of explain some more
Okay.
about exposure
Yeah.
therapy?
So there's a modality that we called it's called PET. So it's prolonged exposure therapy. So it
Yes,
combines imagery. So we walk through the events. So we walk through the events in a
yes.
way that we're able to address those fears and make you understand that you can feel safe in those events. And then, but the
Mm-hmm.
exposure part, and we call this in vivo, where we are actually
Mm-hmm.
going through events that you've avoided. So we make a list of all the things that you've avoided in terms of events, places, even people or situations, and we gradually
Yes,
approach those in a space where you have a little bit more control, and it's a gradual exposure. So it's not an onslaught of, okay, here you go. It's more so saying,
exactly.
how can we approach this in a gradual way that gives you the control back and makes you realize that you're still safe and you're in control. And
Yes,
if there's way too much, but you can pull back. But then when it's time to try that again, you will feel more successful because you got the control back. And at some point, it
ex
will lower the anxiety, and it will offer you
yes,
parts parts of your life back that you may have been missing for 10, 20, 30 years.
yes. I love that because you're absolutely right, because what we're doing, we're gradually taking you through the
Mhm.
steps. We're slowly peeling back each layer of that because by the time we get
Yeah.
to really having this trauma, there have been so many layers that's been on top of
Yeah.
that we have to pull back each layer one at a time. I would say it like this too. I do this whole imagery with trauma, and it's almost like your one of my guilty favorite pleasures is watching hoarders. Although I could never do therapy for hoarders because I probably would go crazy because I could not take the
Mhm.
filth. Um, I think the germaphobe in me would kick in. But what you get to do is go room by room and then decide if you want to unpack it, if you want to just totally toss it out, or if you want to get an
Yeah.
empty box and decide what you're going to put in there. And that's part of the imagery that we do in exposure therapy so that we
Yeah.
can now take it in small doses where we can handle it. And it is a longer process that when anytime you're dealing with any type of PTSD, I had, because what happens is you start to peel back more and more and more layers.
Yeah.
I've had a client now that we've
Yeah.
been dealing with with PTSD for over 3.5 years, and now
Yeah. And this,
we're just doing maintenance now. Yes,
yeah. Well, and when we look at a modality, so we have
yes,
EMDR, we have
yes,
uh, what I talked about before. We have cognitive processing therapy, and we have
yes,
narrative exposure
yes,
therapy. All the things I've done
yes,
before, all of those are
yes,
fixed number of weeks.
yes,
It's a disciplined modality, and we get to tell you exactly what's going to happen. The
yes,
pre-work is to understand all the effects and to understand, the work
yes,
before we get into the meat of the work. It's
most
the
definitely.
it's a psychoeducation. It's a survey of figuring
Yes,
out exactly how extensive is this for you. And then by the time
yes,
we get to the work, you would have a fair understanding of why we're doing
that's
this
right.
and what the possible outcomes are, and hopefully inspire you to say, okay, it's ready to take that chance. And then the way we
Yes,
look at it is each client and their situation may be they may be well suited for a particular modality. So we have to say,
mm-hmm.
okay, well, based on the person and based on the actual life event that
Right.
that sponsored your PTSD,
Yes,
which modality works
Yes.
best for you. And so that's the great thing about this is that trauma is treatable by many different means.
Several different
It's not a one size
modalities.
fits all.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
right.
So it's not a one size fits all, and but it's up to you to tell us what that story is. And so that's my
Yes.
job is to get you comfortable enough to
I
say,
love that.
what is that for you?
Yes, and I love it because if you're anything like me, Corey, as you're doing it, you begin to connect the dots of why
Yes.
you responded this way, and why this happened this way. Because now you're seeing the big picture. Because what we want to do is take a high level view of it, and then we kind of go in, and then we go back high, and with that, so that's very very good as well.
But there's two things I
Can we
love
talk
to
about?
let
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say there's two things I love to do for my clients. The first thing is to normalize their responses because many clients
Yes.
are frustrated that they can't get over the hump. And I said, well,
Yes.
if I had gone through what you said you've gone through, I probably would be experiencing the same outcomes. So the first
Exactly.
thing is
Yes.
normalizing. And I feel like after that first
Yes.
session of normalizing, it's a relief. It's a relief for them to
Yes.
feel like, oh, I don't have to be like so and so. They didn't have my experience.
Yes.
I said, no, this is a part of the course of what you've experienced. That's the first thing. And you say connect the dots,
Yeah.
but it's a miracle that when I help them connect the dots to why things have been happening, it's like an aha for them. It's like, oh, I now understand myself better because I didn't know that
Yes.
maybe my failed marriages was because of this, or maybe I could not concentrate because of this. And I thought I was dumb. No, baby, you're
Exactly.
not dumb. You're stressed.
You were
No,
you were
yeah,
traumatized. Yes, you were
yeah, you're
traumatized. And
traumatized. Yeah,
why we're bounced from relationship and relationship while everything seems like it's failing because we have not dealt with the core root issue of that. What I
yeah.
like to do is go over some of these things when we're talking about some of the trauma responses
Hmm.
to
Okay.
a lot of times post-traumatic stress. Some of the trauma responses, we have this whole thing of flight, fight, freeze, and fawn. So, Daryl, can you put up that image for us that we're going to go with the trauma responses? Corey, can we take a look at the flight first? Some of the trauma responses are flight, and what that looks like. If you're a workaholic, an overthinker, someone who has a lot of anxiety, panicking, OCD. And I do not have my children swear I have obsessive compulsive disorder, though I do not. Difficulty sitting still and being a perfectionist. Let's unpack some of the flight things that people do when they
Well,
have
so let
trauma
me unpack this very
responses.
quickly and what this
Yes,
is
go
saying
right
to you.
ahead.
What this
Hmm.
is saying to you is that I'm avoiding the actual thing that's bothering me.
That's
And
it.
so when you
That's it.
overwork that, so yes, when you're workaholic, by the time you get home, you don't have time to deal with the stress because you're going to
You
bed.
don't have time. You're too
If you
tired. Yes.
yeah, yeah. And if you are a perfectionist in that area and it's related to trauma, what that means is that I believe that if I give 1000% to something else, then it'll mask that 5% that is lacking over
Yes.
here.
Yes.
And that's why we see the
Totally agree.
overachievers. And it's not because they really want to achieve it. It's because if I do this,
Avoidance.
then it'll balance,
Yes.
which is not right anyway. But I think it'll balance these things I'm not working on. But those things you
And
didn't work
and
on
that's
are
so
still there.
typical. Yes. It's so typical of men behaviors because
Absolutely.
we're already supposed to be the warriors, the protect. So now I can bury myself in work. I can bury myself by being and here's what we do: being a perfectionist on my job, so I don't have to deal with the trauma, the personal trauma in my life.
Yeah.
So yes, you volunteer for all the. You don't even have to volunteer. You just do all the overtime. You. I have to do this. And now your anxiety, although your anxiety is through the roof while you're at
Yeah.
work, I at least have control over that. Does that make sense?
But think about this,
Because
Marty.
now, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but think about this. This is the young boy that that's a basketball star in high school.
Hmm. Hmm.
Something happens, and he's a star of the
Yes.
team. They're going to tell him,
Hmm.
"Okay, shake it off, and get back on the court."
Right.
They're not going to say,
Right.
"Okay, after you play, then go see a therapist." They're like, "Look, there's a big game, and you have to show up and perform."
Yes.
Instantly, that says,
Yes.
"I can wait for this. My feelings are not as important as winning. My feelings are not as important as winning. So then when you get those messages repeated, and then when you're doing well on the
Yes.
job and you're doing,
Yes.
and you're doing well in your community, my feelings are not as important as achieving. Then when I get married, I have to provide. So again, my feelings are not as important as
But
achieving. But then at some
yes.
point, there's a summit where it all crashes.
Yes, because if I win the game, there's a reward. If I do more
Yes.
work at work, there's a reward. But
And you
dealing
know
with
about the
my
reward system
feelings,
already.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But me dealing with my feelings, there's not an immediate reward. The reward might
No.
come a year from now, 5 years from now. And so, especially in this microwave society that we live in, we want everything, we want our reward and we want to fix it now, without realizing the trauma was not in most cases an instant thing. It was a prolonged thing. So I believe also
Mhm.
the longer that you're in that traumatic situation, a lot of times the longer it is going to be to process that. And I tell people all the time, listen, we're not here for a quick fix. Now we can definitely do some limited times, but it depends on how much work you want to do, especially when it's been years of PTSD and we're sweeping the trauma underneath the bridge. So when we're talking about
Yeah.
flight, those are some of the things that we're definitely talking about and how to recognize the trauma response of flight. Yes. Okay. Can we go to the next one, Corey?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's look at. So the next one is fight. This is where I like to call it the angry black man. We have anger outbursts. We're extremely controlling. We are sometimes dubbed as the bully. Narcissistic. Woo! Now that's scary because everyone wants to label everyone a narcissist these days. But there's some clearly defining factors of narcissism, and then also explosive behaviors. Yes, I think fight speaks more to the depressive side of the trauma responses more so than flight does, because we're seeing all the emotional outbursts in fight. And I think for especially for men, our depression shows up very differently than a lot of times women does. We're
Really?
not doing the constant crying, so the emotional outbursts, the irritation, the exploding, the controlling, that a lot of times are signs of depression, the depressive side of the trauma responses that we see a lot
But
of times in men and people as well. Talk to me, Corey, about that and the
but
fight.
also, this is the part that's going to be very interesting to some men. On that side is the most sensitive emotions because you're
Yes,
fighting accusations. You fight. So, for example,
yes,
I'm angry because you called something out that I've been trying to not show
yes,
you. So if you
yes,
offend me, eh, do I feel offended or do I feel called out? Those are two. So those are two different things. Oh, you called me out for something I've been
yes,
trying to hide. So all of that behavior also on that
yes.
side is saying I'm defending my honor, and
That's good.
I'm afraid to admit where you may have spotted my weakness. So I'm going to argue a point that actually feeds my lie to myself. So that means if you
Yes,
call me out and it's true, I'm going to fight you because that's not what I want to believe. And also, when you're
yeah,
dealing with trauma, it can make you hypersensitive. So any trigger
yes,
that has that emotional value, it can cause
yes,
anger. It can cause those outbursts. And also, narcissism has some root in trauma. So when you
yes,
are dealing with the narcissist,
yes,
you may be surprised that the reason why they have that behavior is because they need that inflated image of self, so that way
yes,
they don't have to
yes,
self sabotage. They don't
yeah,
have to
and
admit that
because
they're actually a failure on
yes,
the inside. So that's
yes,
why that
that's right.
that's why that self-proclaimed image is there.
Yes, because the fight is the opposite of in my thought here, my professional thinking of vulnerability. Because I
Yeah,
cannot let you know how vulnerable I really am, I have to fight you to disguise it, to
absolutely.
hide it, so that
Yeah.
you don't not know that I'm more vulnerable and that you actually touch that sensitive spot. And so I'm reacting, I'm responding to that trauma instead of dealing with it and saying, hey, that hurt. And that hurt
Yeah.
deeply because we, especially as Black men, are not allowed to be vulnerable.
And this is when we see the lack of coping skills. When we see
Mm.
the fighting and the outbursts and the
Talk to us,
anger,
Cory.
we then can
Yes.
identify, oh, you don't have adequate skills of coping with your emotions. You may
Yes.
lack the emotional
Yes.
regulation that the
Yes.
average person may have based on their nurturing, based on their
Yes.
lack of experience with trauma. So sometimes trauma
Yes.
and as you said, if it's prolonged or if it's trauma that's been induced during childhood, you may have a
Yes.
lack of emotional a lack of balancing your emotions. And and
Yes.
surprisingly for parents and for those who are in school, sometimes we misdiagnose ADHD when it's actually a trauma response. So, aha. So if any one of
Exactly.
you are, are in
That's
school as
good.
workers and in admin, I hate to offend you, but some of
Well,
the
that's not
children that
offensive.
we are labeling as
That's telling the truth.
ADHD, yeah,
Yes.
yeah, and this is the work I do. So for me, the work is to uncover. So that child that
Yes.
you may think that can't focus, the child that is irritable, the child that may have a hard time thinking and focusing, those are all
Yes.
trauma responses. So until we get the deeper
Yes.
story, some of us are missing the boat with these children, and we're diagnosing them and we're putting them on medication when what they need
Misdiagnosing
is
them.
trauma counseling. They yeah.
Yes.
So we need trauma counseling, but again, schools are not always equipped. And actually, some counselors are not always equipped with the trauma training either.
Yes.
So sometimes
Yes.
it's the fact of who is seeing that child. Is the person qualified to look
Yes.
at the deeper story?
And
Yeah.
that's why I'm so glad with here in California when we're talking about Medi-Cal, which you guys call Medicaid, that is
Okay.
imperative that we put in there the whole ACEs study, the adverse childhood experiences, because if we can
And
get
that's
that
important.
score on that, it is very important. That can direct us saying, hey, this score is just 10 short questions, and it talks about
Yeah.
what did you witness? What did you experience? How did you feel?
Yeah.
Was there any type of abuse in there? Because that then can help scope if we're dealing with trauma or one of the, or
Yeah.
if not, then that points away. Then we can definitely then now rule out um,
And
ADHD.
one
We can rule
answer,
out
yeah.
depression.
And one
Yep. Go
answer
ahead.
on that ACEs, just one, can point you in the direction of
Yes.
trauma. Only one of those
Yes.
questions. And that's what,
Yes.
but I'm glad you guys are doing that there because that's what I do with my child clients is that
Yes.
I ask them, it's like, and then the parents need to know what this ACE score is because sometimes it's not because they've done something, it's because what they've experienced. And so these
Yeah.
conversations and because you mentioned about how long will this wave last? Black people and
Hmm.
talking about therapy and putting it in the forefront. My hope is
Yes.
that it becomes permanent
Yeah. Me
because you'd be
too.
surprised as to how
Me
many
too.
people still contact me saying it's hard to find a black therapist. And I know it's not hard. You know it's not hard,
Well,
but
right.
it's just the
But
stigmas they have. I'm like, no, there's several of us. There's directories just for us. But because of the misconceptions, they believe it was hard. And it's not.
but then there has to be exposure, and there has to be
Yeah.
adequate knowledge and equipping of our
Yeah.
communities as well, because we don't see a therapist office a lot of times. We see liquor
Yeah.
stores. We
Yeah.
see now the legalized weed stores in California, but we don't see the therapist office. We don't see those places in our, and do you know, even in oh, come on, is it LA County? One of these in Los Angeles, there are no urgent cares, like emergency time. There's the hospitals,
Wow.
but like just
Yeah.
right. What I found that just like blew my mind when we're saying that. So
We also have to look at the stigmas. We also have to look at
yes,
all the stigmas, and we have to look at religion. Now there's a bridge now between spirituality and psychology now. So we're seeing it
yes,
happen now where churches have their ministries where it's focused on mental health. And so I'm glad to see that
yes,
because back in the day it was
finally,
one or it was
one or
either
the other.
church or counseling, but you couldn't bridge the two.
And I can
And not
pray
only
and
that,
still
so when
see
you
my
look at
therapist.
yeah, yeah, and so when you look at multimedia on the major networks, and if there's a counselor or a therapist, they're usually what? They're usually white.
Yeah.
Then if we talk to our grandparents don't have any experience with a black therapist, so they're passing on their trauma down, down these levels, and so we believe what our
And that
grandparents
goes through
say,
the whole
that there's no black therapist.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that goes to the whole systemic racism that has been permeated throughout the medical and especially our psychological field. Let's go to the third response in this
sure, yeah, please.
trauma responses as well. And that third one is freeze. Freeze, these are when you're having trouble, difficulty making decisions, when you're stuck and can't move. There's some disassociation. That's a good one. Some
Yeah,
isolation and numbness. In other words, you do absolutely nothing and you try to ignore that the trauma even happened. Talk to us about some of that, which you have seen in your practice, Cory, when we're talking about freeze,
sure.
because freeze is
Yeah,
so relevant.
I think freeze is such a complex thing because it's like
Yes,
freeze can actually be that I have many thoughts, but because I don't trust myself, I can't make a single decision.
yes. Oh, that's good.
So
That's good.
sometimes freezing is not because we're avoiding it. It could be because we're so
Yes,
overwhelmed with responses and choices,
yes,
but we don't trust any of those because we don't trust ourselves.
yes,
So trauma can cause you to not trust yourself because what if I make the wrong decision? What if I put myself back in a space
yes,
of being traumatized again?
yes,
It'll be my fault again, especially if you blamed yourself for it.
yes.
That
Oh,
freeze
that's good.
response
That's
is
good.
it is more popular for people who have self-blame. They will freeze because it's like, oh my God, if I make another choice, I'm going to put myself in a situation that causes me harm. So we freeze and we're stuck. And then even being frozen puts us in a vulnerable state that we can't always climb out of because we're stuck. And something may
Yes.
happen in the stuck moment.
Yeah, I love this response. Says a lot of the younger generation these days are under systemic racism, and the younger African American culture is because our society and white privilege is traumatizing our younger generation. And I don't think it's just traumatizing
But you
our
know why
younger
that's
generation.
happening
I
now?
totally
But you
agree.
know why that's happening?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's happening
why's
now
that?
because we have social media. We have social
Yes,
media, so we have cell phones. So the thing about
yes.
these court cases and all this none of this is brand new, right? But 20 years
No,
ago, we didn't
it's
hear about a case in California unless it was
yes,
major.
national,
Nowadays,
made
we see
national
a traffic stop
headlines.
happen at 9 a.m. and 9:05, it's on where? It's on Instagram, it's on Facebook. So now it's
Yes,
just a fact that it is so popular for us to see the racism. It's been there. It's just now we have these mediums where it's broadcast more
but
often. And then when it's broadcast so often and the same things happening, we can get what we
yes,
call, secondhand trauma because
yes.
it is
That's
shown
good. Thank
that
you,
a
Cory.
culture is also tied
Thank you.
through our genetics. So that's why if you get hurt, and I
Yes.
don't know you, Marty, I can feel that here in DC
Yes.
because you're one of me, because I
Yes.
can identify. It feels personal. So there is this thought that we are
Well,
tied through our genes as a culture.
and a lot of times, like you're saying, some of us have experienced someone in our family who was going. That's why George
That too.
Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and they won that wonderful case today that was out there
Hmm.
where on they were tried on the federal side of that, and they were all three of them found guilty. That on the federal side as well as breaking federal law,
But the sad
but
part about that
again,
is, even though we have justice, it does not erase the fact that we were traumatized.
it doesn't.
So yes, you
So
so
we got
basically you
justice
paid my
on one
trauma.
end, yes, but
Yeah,
now we have to now release all of that. So now we can begin the
yeah.
healing process. Yes, like the Rodney King. Yes, yeah, Rodney King. Yeah, and I had an opportunity of meeting Rodney King before he passed away, and definitely you could tell there was a lot of psychological damage that had occurred with that. He was the nicest gentleman, one of the nicest gentlemen I ever met, and his portrayal from my personal
Hmm.
experience of him did not match the Rodney King that came out of that. So that is so true. But when we're talking about freeze, I believe, is probably one of the most common factors in um, domestic violence situations because that's another traumatic experience, especially. Can we talk about what we don't talk about a lot? Domestic violence on men, where they're not the perpetrators, but they are the victims. of domestic
Yeah.
violence. And so you'll hear a lot of freeze because of embarrassment. So I'm just not going to say anything and I will ignore it like it never happened in those circumstances,
Yeah.
especially in
And
same
with men,
gender loving
because we're trained.
communities.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we're trained to, well, and it's interesting because in the same gender loving community, it's very interesting because it's actually more violent because,
Yes.
it's
Yes.
two men. So I had a client, and I'm going to say this real quickly because I know we have the last point. When he went through it and he was kicked and beaten, had bruises, very fair skinned guy. When he called the police, but the police officer said, "Well, because you're not bleeding, I can't do anything."
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
and that was back then. But now
Yes.
that's why we have to talk about it as a whole thing. And so sometimes we say, "Oh, because it's two men," but you should be able to fight your way out of it. I shouldn't fight in any relationship, period. I don't care who it is. I should not have
Mm-hmm.
to fight
Mm-hmm.
in a relationship. So once we get that
Mm-hmm.
under wraps, it's like, no, you should not be physically fighting in a relationship, whether you're man or woman.
and and
Then we'll
and
have a
and
fair
those are
understanding about it.
again, yes, a lot of times in those DV type of relationships, because I grew up in a domestic violent home, there was because of trauma that was happening
Yeah.
on that end as well. So there's so much trauma dictates so much of our behaviors that there's much more
Yes. If we have
trauma
more time, I can
and
go into that
PTSD.
because,
Oh, I know,
yeah,
I know. We need a part two on this whole trauma, but let's
yeah,
do the last one because we're getting close to time, and I want to respect your
sure.
time, brother Cory, because you're on the East Coast. Fawn. Now, this is the one that I struggled with the most, being a people pleaser, lack of identity. I didn't have that problem. No boundaries, being overwhelmed and codependent. And that is one that
Well,
we oftentimes don't address in the trauma responses because, especially when I talk about the people pleaser, if I please you, the perpetrator or try and please that situation, then they're going to have
mhm.
mercy on me, and that's not always the case. And then I could sweep it under the rug and again act as if nothing happened. And so now I'm
But
being very extremely passive aggressive. But talk to us
yeah,
about that particular role in there,
absolutely.
Corey.
So you gave a possible traumatic experience as to how someone coped with that.
Yes,
Let's also bring that into your adult relationships after the trauma's over.
yes,
Doing
yes,
the same thing as
exactly.
a people pleaser,
Yes,
all those things listed, I will tell you what that means. That you've abandoned yourself as a priority. All
yes,
of those. You've abandoned yourself as a priority. So when you have no boundaries,
yes.
and so we see no boundaries happen, especially in cases of child maltreatment where the boundaries are taught in childhood. But let's say it's
Mm-hmm.
a trusted other who may have violated you.
Yes.
That messes up your
Yes.
boundaries, especially with sexual assault.
Yes.
Your boundaries are just skewed everywhere.
Yes.
Um, and also the codependency because you don't
Mm-hmm.
believe that your identity alone is enough for you to survive because that's how you've coped is the same person that hurt you is the same person that also provides for you. So then you grow up
Yes.
thinking, oh, the person I have to be with. And this is when we get into the term we call trauma repetition, whereas we subconsciously repeat
Yes.
the trauma because that's what we're most comfortable with. So we may get
Mm-hmm.
into another type of abusive or controlling type of
Right.
relationship because that's what we've adjusted
That's
to
the
the most.
pattern.
Even though we don't want
And
it, even though we may not want
right.
it, but it is the most comfortable space for us to be.
But that speaks to that whole generational trauma and how it's passed down and how we normalize it till we again, like
Yeah.
Dr. Rita Walker says, till we no longer recognize that we are in crises. And Ty, good to see. Ty, I gotta have you on the show. Give me a time you're available, brother. Got to have you on the show. Ty says, yes, we definitely need a part two because we've just barely scratched the surface of this whole thing.
Yeah.
We've just kind of defined and gave some of the symptomologies of PTSD and trauma. We haven't even gone into a lot of the coping skills and how do we come
Yeah.
out of it with that as well. So Cory, I gotta have you back on for a part two real soon because we just kind of defined this, brother. This has been much better than what I had even imagined or planned, and I can't thank you enough for always being the trauma expert. Cory, tell us how we can continue. How can we follow you? How can we get advice from you? How can I hire you? More importantly, and put some money in the coin
That's
purse.
the big ticket item.
Yes, sir.
So you can follow me on Twitter and on Instagram, and just go to Cory George Cares. It's CoryGeorge Cares. That's my life, so I care. Um, in a nutshell,
Yes.
and my website is CoryGeorge.com, and you'll find out more
Yes.
about my background. Outside of just the trauma work, you'll also see how I've carried the work into multimedia projects. I have a documentary
Yes.
online, and I have some of my show snippets online too. So
Yes.
you'll learn a lot about why I do what I do.
Yes. Yeah, I told you we only try to bring the absolute best on the mental health with Marty program here. Cory is absolutely a trauma genius. Now, Cory, you have so many projects. I'm trying to grow up and be like you. I want to be a multi media mogul like you are. Talk to us about some of your other projects that you're working on right now.
Yeah. So I'm launching the Cory George Show. It's an audio podcast. I'm finally doing what I think I was meant to do. That's going to be on
Yes.
Apple and iTunes starting April 1st. Doing the
Love
artwork
it.
and the promos for that soon. We're talking about some pretty interesting stuff, and I'm excited about it. You're going to hear from my children on the show, for the first time.
Wow.
So we're
Now, are
going to
you having a
share
launch
some of
party?
the I don't know, but so my daughter, so I told you my daughter's trans. So one of my first shows is about our family journey into that. So I think people
Yes.
really want to hear that. I'm also waiting for my show on Discovery Channel to start airing. I don't have an air date just yet, so working on that.
Wow.
And I'm just out here scouting and getting ready for the big leagues.
I'm
I
loving
love what I
it.
do, and I just really want to be able to bring the information and the psychoeducation and the
That's
remedies
right.
um, to the public for us. So that's always been my goal.
Awesome. Well, Cory, if you decide to have a launch party, man, I'd love to host it for you. It would be my gift to you because you are so
Awesome.
amazing and I love all that you do. So, again, y'all, Cory George doing some amazing work.
Thank you
Thank
for
you,
having
Cory,
me
for
all the
always
time.
joining us. Listen, anytime, man, definitely. Again, check out Cory George. He's doing some amazing work out there in the DMV area and arena. We want to just leave you with these five habits and 5 tips of how to overcome and manage trauma and trauma responses. This is what I call the 5 R's to responding to trauma. Number one, and the first one, recognize when you are in crises. We have to learn to recognize when you are in crisis, meaning things are not the norm, and don't stop normalizing trauma like Cory and I have been encouraging today. Recognize when something is out of place, even if you've been doing it for years. Recognize when you're in crisis. Number two, what do you have to do? Recognize the appropriate trauma response. Cory and I have been talking about that. Go back if you just came in. Flight, fight, freeze, or fawn. Go back and recognize which one of those or which ones of those are you exhibiting in your daily behavior. Number three, recognize that you need help. It's okay not to be okay. Recognize that you need help. Number four, respond by getting the necessary help. Recognize that you need help, but just don't recognize you need help. Respond by getting the necessary help. And number five, what is that? Respond accordingly to your professional support. That's what we want to remind you of today. And how do we do that? You can always type, well, if you're finding yourself in crises, you can type crises to 741-741. Again, that's crises to 741 to 741. Now, we don't want to leave you without any help, but we want to give you some basic resources that you can use in order to get the necessary help that you need. Here are some help resources that we recommend to you. Again, you can type crises to 741-741. You can go to Psychology Today, and they have profiles of therapists. Therapy for Black men. They have some grants right now. If you can't afford therapy, they will give you some help. You can also look at Good Therapy. .com. They also have profiles so that you can find therapists who look like you in your zip code. And of course, marcelconsulting.com. Now, we want to also encourage you, check out our website, mentalhealthmarty.com. Mentalhealthmarty.com. There you will find lots of mental health paraphernalia to support you along journey. We have the Stop the Stinking Thinking journal that is there. So please check that out. And that is a writing journal to track your moods and your thoughts. The Black Mental Health Matters, or Black Men Matter. That's in a t-shirt. And also we do have it in the hoodie because it's cold outside right now. And so again, we want to thank you for joining us for another edition of Mental Health Matters with Marty. We don't want you to continue to secretly suffer in silence in the shadow of shame. But like I say every week, we want you to speak up, speak out, and live. But more importantly, always remember to enjoy your life. Take care, and we'll see you next week. God bless.